Friederike Otto is senior lecturer in Imperial College London and an expert in attribution science. I can say that, yes?
Yes, please.
Yeah, can you, so I think I was thinking of giving an introduction of how we do attribution, but I think I will skip that part of the talk because yeah, I either can do that properly and then it will take too much time, or you just have to believe me. And I will take the second option and then talk about how in some of the work that I've been doing with Petra mainly, but also with other lawyers, science, I think, and has really influenced some of the law cases. So I'm running a team that's called World Weather Attribution, where we do exactly this science, where we causally link extreme weather events and their impacts to human-induced climate change. And for a long time, the sort of saying was, oh, you can't do this, it's all highly uncertain, but that has changed now. We can do this, and it's also been assessed in the latest IPCC report. We actually do have this evidence now. And so I think if you can go to slide number 8.
You have time. You have time.
But yeah, but I would, I mean, Rupert also has, and then we can, I'd rather we have a discussion than spending too much time on it then. So climate litigation, as you are all aware, very much is on the rise domestically in very different jurisdictions and also internationally. And the reasons for that are, on the one hand, of course, that just the actions on all these, I mean, no one needs to die in a heat wave. So a lot of adaptation action is missing, but also, of course, we would have had, if we had stopped burning fossil fuels by the year 2000, when we knew very well how dangerous it is, we would have had way fewer heat waves than we have now, and way less hot, and there would be a lot of totally preventable death and suffering and people losing their livelihood. So there's an absolute striking inadequacy in all the responses. And we now have this new evidence, and that's, but of course we still have a lot of bad faith actors who have done a fantastic job to make all of us, including scientists, think that there's something special about climate change, that it's specifically uncertain, that it's much more uncertain than any other science, which is just not true. It's like any other science as well. Of course, there are uncertainties. You will never get, in any science, you will never get a single number as a result of a scientific study. You will always have a range of numbers, and there will never be the perfect answer. So we have all been made to believe that you need to wait for scientific certainty because we can do anything. And there will never be scientific certainty, but we know a lot, and we know enough to act, and we have known enough to act. And some of the climate litigation cases that are happening are trying to push towards that. And of course, one of the things that I would like to come back at the end also, and I think that also came through in some of the discussions we had today, that we need to, that's why I've highlighted here the social license. We need to change the narrative of what actually people need and people want, because we still pretend that, and we make policies and we elect politicians that pretend the best of all worlds is the 1960s US. And I think most of us, if you would actually think about it, would disagree with that. But still, the framework and the political decisions we make is still as if that status quo is what we need to work towards and achieve. And I think we need all to work on changing that. And that's also important for court cases. So if you go to the next slide, so 3 recent successful court cases that I think have been really, really important in that respect, but also brought up some really important questions of how do we actually use this success to make the world better. And the first one is called Klimasenioren versus Switzerland, where the European Court of Human Justice, a group of Klimasenioren, so a group of elderly Swiss women, have sued Switzerland for their inadequate climate policies because with the argument that that violates their human rights, particularly their right of private life and family, because of what Andy just showed, because of the huge impacts that heat waves have on them and on their livelihoods. And part of the evidence, and that was actually a paper that Rupert led, so he'll maybe talk about that later, but that makes the scientific link that this is not just something that random people say, but you can actually call that the emissions do lead to these adverse health impact on people in Switzerland and of course everywhere in the world. So I think that is a really, really important success because it reminds us that why we actually care about climate change. We care about climate change because not doing anything about climate change is a massive violation of human rights, of the human rights of all people in the world, all, apart from maybe the 0.0001% that makes massive profits from selling and burning fossil fuels, but not the vast majority of humanity. And I think that is a massive opportunity to say that, well, this is why we care about it. And we have this fantastic framework of human rights. And I think we should use it much, much more, not just in courts, but really in the public domain to talk about it. That's why we care. That's why it's important. It's not because we don't want you to eat a steak. But of course, Switzerland has said, yeah, we will ignore this truth. So and I think that's really one of the big questions for a group like this just now. What can we do with this ruling so that it's not just nice and we feel, okay, we've achieved something, but that it actually changes something and that a country like Switzerland cannot just say, I don't do this. And of course, that's a big question and you all know much more about it. How can we make international law actually have teeth? But I think even though that's a long-standing question, I think it's really important. And maybe I think it was important that we had the science that this case was successful. And so maybe bringing actually the science into this, trying to make it more enforceable is something we can think about doing. I don't know how to do that, but I think it's something we need to think about and we should think about in initiatives like this. I don't want to say much about the ITVAs because a lot has been said about that, but I think what was interesting about that is that they actually said that it's really difficult to establish a specific causal link between greenhouse gas emissions originating in one state and the damage caused to other states and their environment. And scientifically, we can't do this. It's just that hasn't quite filtered through to the judges in ITVAs. And I think that's also really a big, research asks for us, how can we make this filtering through faster so that it doesn't take 2 decades for the science to be developed and then people to realize, oh, we can actually do this. And the last one is one where the UK Supreme Court has said that an oil well cannot go forth. So they had a license to dig a new oil well, but the Supreme Court said no, because in their environmental impact assessment they hadn't included the Scope 3 emissions, which of course for new oil well are basically all the emissions that have not been included, and they said okay, and therefore you don't get a license. And what is really interesting about this is that they actually used in the judgment of why they have said you have to include the Scope 3 emissions is because you can causally show that it's a necessary and sufficient condition that will actually pass all the BAC4 and all the causal tests easily, that this will happen with the that this oil that you'll dig up will cause massive harm. And I actually use exact wording from a paper that Petra and I wrote, which is, of course, what made us particularly happy. But I think that just shows that actually these kind of science law collaborations can be really useful and can have real quick impact. And I mean, it worked in the UK for this one oil well. How can we now use that? So that actually never any new extraction licenses can be given. And that was also a successful case in Norway that actually used similar arguments, also very much based on new attribution evidence. So if you go to my next slide, which is my last slide, I think there are some current impediments in making this an easy run through. One of them is really on the scientific, that we can demonstrate the causality so that you really cannot dig any scientific holes in it. But that's, I think, is a really easy bit. We can do that quite easy. But the other things are difficult. One of them is there is currently no metric to actually measure what impacts of climate change are, what damages are. So in every new study, scientists have to make them up, because there is no, like for greenhouse gases, we have agreed upon metrics. They're not perfect, but everyone knows this is the metric to use, so it makes it comparable across states and so on. We don't have that for impacts. We don't have that for damages. We don't have that for adaptation, which makes it really hard to help someone accountable if you can't measure what they've done actually wrong. There's limited understanding of the evidence. I've already said that. It takes 2 decades for the science to be developed to then actually judges being aware of it. And then I think that this normative superstructure is something that, and I know that you had colleagues from the humanities here earlier. I don't think he's here anymore, but I think that's actually one of the really, really important things we need to do, is to change this narrative that it's not okay to ignore all these depth of pollutions. It's not the world we want to live in. It's not the world we want to live in, where all the people who die in climate change don't count, because someone can still make some money with digging up oil. And I think that is, I mean, if I ask all individuals of you, you would say, of course, that's not the world we want to live in. But then the political framework and the discussion you have in the media is as if we still want to live in that world. And I think that's really the big question we have to address in multidisciplinary projects like this. So I'll end here, and